Guns N' Roses. Where do you rank them among the greatest rock bands of all time? Would you rank them higher if they never broke up? Author Martin Popoff has his opinion as we celebrate the 40th anniversary of Guns N' Roses next. Hey guys, welcome back to Booked on Rock. It's great to have this guest back on again. It is Martin Popoff. He is the author of the brand new book, Guns N' Roses at 40. Martin, always great to have you back on.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Very cool.
So tell us about this book, celebrating 40 years of GNR.
Yeah, so the nice thing about this kind of book, and I've done a few of these four-motor books. We've done Kiss at 50, AC/DC at 50, Bowie at 75, and this is Guns N' Roses at 40, so a little bit of a newer band. But it's nice having these books with motor books. Again, this concept is not mine. I believe possibly even Dennis Pernew, my very capable editor over there, came up with this. But the nice thing about these books is they aren't meant to be interview intensive. They're not meant to be actual band biographies or anything like that. So the concept is 40 career highlights of the band, and there's lots of highlights with this band because they've been through so much, presented in a chronological order. A lot of people are saying, I'm getting deep Guns N' Roses fans saying they love the pictures, they love the layout, that they're seeing a lot of rare pictures that they don't normally see. So yeah, the cool thing is this concept, and even the album by album concept I do with these guys, like we've done the Judas Priest recently, Pink Floyd, Queen, AC/DC, and even, like I say, the Bowie at 75. I've never interviewed David Bowie. The nice thing is that I get to write these books on these bands where they aren't straight biographies, so I don't need a lot of interview footage. Having said that, in here, there are a few special sections where I've got some footage from my chats with Duff and Slash and a few other people. I think, who else have I talked to? Tom Zutaut and a few management people around the sides, maybe some producers, engineers. Can't quite remember, but there are those like side little sections. Dennis always likes to have a few things like that in here as sidebars. But yeah, it's broken into 5 acts. I've named every one of these career highlights after song titles, which is always fun to do. That's something I did come up with early on. But yeah, hardcover throughout and really, really nice layout that these guys always do. And I'm getting a lot of compliments on that as well. I mean, they're true coffee table books.
Always laid out beautifully. Yeah, coffee table book. Exactly. GNR started off the short-lived dirty hair metal era. And I think about Tesla, too. They're in that ballpark there. I think they came out with an album a year before.
When this album came out, I was into all things metal. So every single kind of metal, all my legacy bands and hair metal and thrash, I was into that. I was also into a lot of college rock at this time as well. I was into your Replacements and REM and Smiths and U2 and Minutemen, Firehose, Jane's Addiction's coming up and all that. But right in this scene, Appetite for Destruction comes out. I mean, it's a term I've coined over the years, dirty hair metal or bluesy hair metal, sleazy hair metal. Guns N' Roses comes out, and I thought of this album as just a higher quality, one of the top quartile hair metal albums, but I definitely consider it as part of the scene. I think they do have like a hair metal look to them. It's borrowing more on feisty, raw, pushing and pulling with Steven Adler's, drumming time and stuff. It's building upon the best elements of Aerosmith that we all love, kind of thing. And sure, Tesla's kind of part of this, but what happens is this album eventually starts blowing up so big, it does tilt the hair metal ship a little bit. There's still going to be very glammy hair metal, the likes of your Kick Tracy and Slaughter and Warrant and Winger and Firehouse. Remember those guys?
Sure.
Trickster, did I say Trickster? Anyways, there's some very bright and glammy and multi-track vocals and wet drum sounds hair metal. But what Guns N' Roses does is they do cause this fulcrum shift. We get your faster Pussycats and your LA Guns, which has a mixed in with the history of these guys. But we do get Skid Row's a little on the dirty hair metal side. On the bluesy hair metal side, Poison tries a blues album. Cinderella gets even more bluesier. We get the great Badlands. On the dirty, sleazy hair metal side, we get Love Hate, who I absolutely adore. I think they're one of my favorite bands of this whole scene. So Guns N' Roses does cause a shift, but it's not like they cause or they inspire the idea of grunge or anything like that. They're still a hair metal band, but it is more real, more authentic, more rock and roll. And it's taken a little bit away from that overt commercialism that you see with the other hair metal bands. And yeah, like I say, it causes some great stuff like that. Tesla starts in 86. They start a little bit before this, but they have a lot of heart and soul as well. They're not from the Strip. They're from Northern California, right? And they make some great albums, Psychotic Supper, Bust a Nut. I love those records. So they're a little bit in this range as well, but they also sound very corporate and clean and well recorded and ambitious. It's lacking the danger that you get in the Guns N' Roses album. So there's a reason this album was huge. And there's a reason, the two massive follow-ups, which are both like 75 minutes long or whatever, gives you a lot of music, right up into 1991, right? Same day that Nirvana's Nevermind comes out, right? But there's still those two records, I think, double down and underscore what they were getting at on Appetite. I think they're very similar to Appetite. A lot of people put them down and think they're not as good as Appetite, but I think, given how much music is on there, it's always nice to play that game. Like if I could pick my favorite 55 minutes of music, because Appetite's a long album, right? If I could pick my favorite 55 minutes of music off of that, I'd probably like it more than Appetite. I think those albums are also really, really good.
I was going to ask you about that. If you would pare down both the Use Your Illusion 1 and 2 and make it one album, and I'll ask about that in a little bit. You did interview the guys in the band except for Axl. Mysterious Guy kind of worked for him for a while there, but then all of a sudden the tides turn and it's working against him, particularly after the Guns N' Roses original era comes to an end, right?
Yeah, Axl's a funny situation in here. There's so much personality in this band, but Axl also being the lead singer, having that very uncommon, screechy, strange voice that nobody else has, being a great singer with it as well. I always consider that two separate things. You've got your voice and you've got your singing ability, right? And he's got both. He's got a super interesting voice and he's a super interesting singer. But yeah, he's a mysterious figure. I think it works against him a little bit early on. He's a little eccentric. Doesn't seem, there's riots that get caused. He doesn't come on time. He throws tantrums, all that sort of stuff. I think it works a little bit against him and for him, at that exact same time where people like the danger and the rock and rollness and like seeing this guy who seems to be willing to throw away his career at any turn, right on a dime.
Almost punk rock like.
Yeah, very punk rock, and we know there's a punk element in the band through Izzy, but especially Duff. But as time goes on, I think what we start to appreciate more from Axl is he slowly starts building back up that goodwill through his very capable helmsmanship of that very tough AC/DC lead singer role on that tour, where he seemed very humble and respectful of the job, getting the job done. And then through the very creative experience of the whole Chinese Democracy album and touring cycles before and after, where we learned that he is so creative and so respectful of the muse that he will work with a lot of people. He'll make a lot of music, doesn't seem to really care if it comes out. And then afterwards, putting together the more capable pack a lunch and go to work every day version of the band that has been very professional sort of ever since sort of thing. So yeah, he's had this up and down, goodwill, bad vibes sort of situation, unlike Motley Crue, who just seem to have their vibes keep going down and down and down all the time, to the point where now people get cranky when they talk about Motley Crue because there's never been a rehabilitation of their image. Their image just slowly declined over the years and just has gotten worse and worse and worse. And there's never been any bright spots where anybody said, oh, I guess I kind of like these guys a little more now for some reason. It's just always negative things happening with that band, where Guns N' Roses seem to have matured over the years. And each of those guys, to a man, turned himself around in various ways. Even Izzy, which is a funny one, where, one thing putting together this book, I thought it was really interesting how many times Izzy would guest with the guys. But we love the idea of Izzy even more over the years because of how prolific he's been and how he's just had no problem with just being an underground artist his whole life, right? Which is really kind of a cool thing about him. So yeah, over the years, I think we've seen, I would say, through all five of those original guys, and even Matt Sorum along the way, I think their reputations have improved over the years to the point where everybody kind of likes Guns N' Roses now.
A lot of people don't know about this Rapid Fire. This was Axl's first band, comes right off the bus from Indiana to Hollywood, and he's in this band Rapid Fire just for a brief period, but then Guns N' Roses forms. And I always forget, too, Slash, Steven Adler, not part of the original lineup.
Yeah, they all had their own stuff going on. There's Road Crew, like you say, there's LA Guns, there's What Are We Gonna Call This? Tracy Guns In, Tracy Guns Out, all that kind of stuff. So they're just working out the parts, putting this together. It does come together kind of slapdash, but I think underlying all the decadence that you see in the band, I think you do see ambition and you see a real love of music. These guys all know a lot about the history of rock and roll and punk and obscure stuff and famous stuff. And I think there is a higher calling throughout all of that. There is a higher calling of just wanting to be enthusiastic participators in this long history of rock and roll.
Duff talked about his background, which I didn't know about. He'd been in bands for 10 years before that. He was in a band called Nicotine. He was in a band called Veins. But the other story about Slash auditioning for Poison, which somebody had said recently, I said, boy, isn't that crazy? And they said, well, not really when you think of the small world that the Sunset Strip and all those bands, they all knew each other. So everybody was in one band or another at one point.
Yeah, absolutely. These guys are trying out for different situations. You know, Poison obviously didn't look every day like they do on the front cover of the debut album. You know, they're a rough rock and rolling band, and that album's pretty heavy and rocking. You know, and like I say, they even became one of these bands that got as bluesy as Guns N' Roses would ever.
The Native Tongue you're talking about, right? Is that the one? Yeah, that's a great album with Stand. That's Blue Saraceno, I think, on guitar.
Yeah, and they also had, it's funny, they bridged both worlds because they also had a real glammy aspect to them as well. And I'm not just talking about the look, but I mean, even in the songs, they had kind of like a simple Kiss-like quality that they threw into a lot of stuff. You think of Ricky with a small drum set and stuff. And we know Steven Adler never had a massive drum set either, but that was more of like a rock and roll, kind of a standard Joey Kramer sort of rock vibe out of him. So yeah, these guys, definitely they're coming from that world. Duff was an absolute punk rocker, total musicologist, knew what he was doing. And then he went on in life. Also, I think one of the cool things we love about Duff is that he will just throw himself into any kind of cool project if he thinks it's fun. He doesn't care how big or how much exposure he gets out of it. He's not chasing fame with these things. He's chasing the muse. He wants to make a bunch of cool music. And I think that's a great thing about him. And we also have to think about Slash. You know, I just recently did a funny, we've got our Contrarians YouTube channel, and I did a top 10 called the top 10 answers for how many Guns N' Roses albums there are, right? Because it's such a complicated, weird outlaw catalog, right? But one of the points I wanted to make there as well is that outside of Axl and outside of Steven, everybody made a lot of music, and Slash also made a lot of music. He made the Slash album. He made the two Slash's Snake Pit albums. He made all those albums with Slash featuring Miles Kennedy, right? Velvet Revolver, right? Slash and Duff together. So I think in a certain respect, given the proximity of the types of music these guys made every time they are away from the band, I mean, you could say there's essentially 30-ish Guns N' Roses albums out there. Because it's not like these guys were lazy. It's just that they didn't say Guns N' Roses on the tin. But they love music, and they proved that they're in it for the right reason by going out and, hey, if we're not getting along with Axl, if Axl doesn't want us in under the brand name, doesn't mean we're going to stop making music. So that's another cool thing about them. And I think it contributes to the goodwill that's built up around this band, you know, slowly the rehabilitation of the band over the years.
Find the Booked on Rock website at bookedonrock.com. There you can find all the back episodes of the show, the latest episode in video and audio, plus a video highlight and a link to our YouTube channel. Links to all of the platforms where you can listen to the podcast, plus all the social media platforms. We're on Blue Sky, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, and X. Also, check out the Booked on Rock blog, find your local independent bookstore, find out all the latest hot rock book releases. And before you go, check out the Booked on Rock online store. Pick up some Booked on Rock merch. It's all at bookedonrock.com. What's interesting about Guns N' Roses is, they weren't a pretty hair band, glam band, but they also understood there was a need for an image because it's in the book where they talk about, they knew the hat, the top hat, Slash, Axl had a certain look about him. So they were smart enough to know, which is what I think what sets them apart from a band like Tesla. Like you could name, if you asked, we know the members of the band of Tesla because we're hardcore fans. You ask the average music fan, name a member of Guns N' Roses. Oh, Slash, Axl. If you ask them about Tesla, no. So I think there's the identifiable characters in the band, and they were very much aware of that early on.
Yeah, I'd say they were aware of that. It's an interesting question because you might say that because there's so much kind of authenticity about this band, and that's what people love about them, and that's why it's one of the biggest selling albums of all time. As you know, I mean, the follow-ups sold a lot too. I think there is an image, but they arrive at it organically, and it's not like they are absolutely studying the hell out of it to get it perfect, right?
But just enough.
Just enough. Yeah, it's just like artistic. They're thinking about it just enough. Because Axl, if you think about it over the years, he doesn't really kind of stick with one fashion sense or hairstyle or anything like that. Or nor does Duff particularly. So I think what you get out of this band, having personality in all sort of five corners of the band, I think they understand image, but it came to them naturally, just like being authentic rock and rollers came to them naturally.
Martin Popoff, the author of the new book Guns N' Roses at 40, which is out now. This chapter on the Appetite for Destruction demo is very interesting. It was produced by Nazareth guitarist Manny Charlton. November Rain was recorded at that time, not included on Appetite. Charlton loved it, but Axl didn't want it on the album. Why do you think that was?
Axl has a clear idea of what he wants. He seems to understand the big picture. He seems to understand sequencing, and yeah, it's you remind me. There was a flirtation with maybe having Paul Stanley produce it. Manny comes in and does this. They end up with Mike Klink, which I think turned out to be brilliant. But parsing, who knows what would have happened otherwise? But I think what happened with Mike Klink here and this particular set of songs is they happen to subtly, I mean, they catch lightning in a bottle, but if you try to like articulate what the production values of that record are, they're fairly conservative, but they're also raw, and they've just got this aggression and bite to them. There's just some sort of unnameable magic to the production of this record, but you'd never say it's an eccentric or weird production or unorthodox production. It just sounds vital. It's got kind of like this steely hard edge, but you still have enough bottom end and you still have enough brightness. And I think one of the special things about the record that makes it so magical, and you actually get it again. So it's nice that you get it again on both the Use Your Illusion albums. But I think the cool thing about it that is a challenging thing, and you don't normally say this about production because you normally talk about how much high end or bottom end or what the drums sound like, is that you get this trademark, aggressive, violent, pushing and pulling Slash guitar sound. I think that's a big part of the production on this. It really cuts through. It's a little bit like a buzzsaw guitar sound, but not too crazy. It just has enough bite to it that it elevates the songs into this real outlaw bad boy sort of status. So yeah, I don't know how much credit you really need to give to Mike Klink for that, but you could possibly give him quite a bit of credit. Does it come from the fingers? Does it come from the amp choices? Does it come from the engineering? Does it come from the booze and the drugs? Who knows? But fortunately, it is there, and they use them again next time, and it's still there, which is nice.
There's a really cool connection with Paul Stanley and Mike Klink that I didn't realize until I was reading the book and then looking this up. Paul Stanley at the time was working on the Crazy Nights album, and that was produced by Ron Nevison. Mike Klink was a trainee of Ron Nevison. I didn't know that. That's pretty cool.
Interesting, yeah.
What do you think it would have sounded like if Paul Stanley produced this? It would have sounded more like, because he wanted it to sound more like maybe a Whitesnake album.
Man, who knows? Number one, Paul is no producer. I mean, Paul would be in there. He's not an engineer producer, and he doesn't produce much.
Did he produce New England's album, I believe?
Yeah, New England. And I don't think the Kiss albums sound particularly good. I don't think any of those sound particularly good. They're very mid-rangey.
Thin. Crazy Nights is very thin.
Yeah, Crazy Nights is definitely not a good sounding album. It's probably the worst of all those. And Ron Nevison, I don't think particularly ever got that great productions out of bands. I mean, we can go through all of them. I'm sure there's some good ones in there, but judging how great this record sounds and how great it sold, you can only go down from there. But who knows? I mean, Paul definitely has great songwriting instincts. So I think he could be the kind of producer that would do a good job of picking the songs, changing things around, the parts a little bit, maybe working on the arrangements a little bit, bringing all that vast Kiss knowledge to the situation. But again, the silly thing is that you can only go one direction from Appetite for
Sure.
Destruction's success and quality, and that's down. So logically speaking, if we did the math on it, it would turn out a lot worse than it did, because you can't get
You
much
can't
better
get better.
than this. Yeah.
Some people have said Guns N' Roses and Appetite was almost a bridge between metal and grunge. It bridged the gap to grunge rock with Nirvana.
I don't feel that at all. This is where, like, I think people over romanticize that album, and I don't think there's an ounce of grunge in it at all. I think it's just a really high quality bridging of the things you love about Aerosmith and hair metal, and that's
Sure.
it.
Yeah. Kurt Cobain was not listening to Guns N' Roses Appetite for
No,
Destruction.
I don't think grunge was particularly inspired or influenced by any of this either. I mean, there might have been a little bit of a signal connection of the crossbreed of Duff being there and Seattle people talking back and forth and some chatter there. But grunge is just a next very impressive level of creative beyond anything that happens in hair metal. And I think Appetite is happening in hair metal. So I don't think it's a particularly creative album. It is just good quality conservative hard rock and roll, very good songs, but it's not crazy nutty creative, which grunge is. I think grunge needs to be commended for the insane artistic quality of coming up with whatever those songs are across all those Soundgarden albums, and that cool hybrid sound that Alice in Chains came up with, and the weird scrapey nuttiness of Nirvana and Tad and Melvins kind of thing. And yeah, great songwriting, obviously, with Nirvana as well. So no, I don't. I think literally all this does is it dirties up hair metal for a few years.
I'd love to know what your top pick is among the hit singles and your top pick among the deep tracks from Appetite. The hit singles, of course, Welcome to the Jungle, Sweet Child of Mine, Paradise City. Do you have a favorite of the hit singles?
I think Welcome to the Jungle is the best song out of all of those. I think it's the most Aerosmithy in a smart Aerosmithy way. And the rest of the album there is possibly some semi filler on there. I don't know. Or the thing that people forget about that album is how long it is. And somehow, through, again, all this luck that Guns N' Roses has, somehow by the album being that long, it doesn't end up being compromised on the sound the way Dawkins' Back for the Attack or AC/DC's single live album, If You Want Blood, had happened to them. I think both of those sound a little bit thin because they're too long, and that doesn't happen with this album.
53 minutes, 52 seconds long, according to
Okay.
Wikipedia.
Yeah.
I would say My Michelle and Rocket Queen, those two, I love those two songs among the deep tracks. I would have to go with Rocket Queen if I had to choose one. That's my top. You got It's So Easy, Night Train, Out to Get Me, Mr. Brownstone, considered, I guess, a deep track, right? My Michelle, Think
Yeah,
About
Mr.
You.
Brownstone, I would say, is really good, very Aerosmithy. My Michelle as well. But yeah, you think, you just said My Michelle and Rocket Queen. I mean, talk about hair metal titles,
Right.
right? I mean, this is
Yeah,
a hair metal band. I have no
exactly.
problem thinking of them as a hair metal band.
Anything Goes, You're Crazy. Those are the two other deep tracks. Some great stuff on there. Okay, let's talk about Use Your Illusion 1 and 2. Because by this time now, Guns N' Roses, I guess arguably the biggest band in the world. There's a debate on that, but there's also a debate as to whether those songs should have been pared down to just one. Your opinion?
I think it's really cool. The outlaw nature of this band is that it's like, okay, you've all been complaining that we haven't followed up this album. Here's two 78-minute albums or 75 or whatever it is all at once, which is literally, even in the CD age, that adds up to like 3 albums, right? So 3 albums come out all at once across 2 albums, all on the same day. Same weird artwork with a kind of scrappy, weird story, like an adapted piece of artwork. Even that shows Axl's artistry, where he just sweated bullets over coming up with his artwork and came up with this. I love the title, Use Your Illusion. I think that's really cool. I don't think the sort of falling down the rabbit hole of fillerness is as bad as some of the filler on something like a Clash Sandinista on here. I think everything is essentially a properly put together song, maybe except for My World. But everything else is kind of in the zone of a song that seems worked on enough. I don't think it needs paring down. I think it's just a great part of, a story in rock and roll that this happened, that you got these two massive long albums full of, what do we got here? 14 and 16. So you got 30 songs all in total, and some long songs in there as well. So yeah, I thought it was really cool. I thought Matt Sorum drumming, I don't know. I've heard people complain about the drums and, he didn't have the feel of Steven Adler and all this stuff. I don't care. I love his style.
See, I feel I miss Steven Adler. I'm one of those who, not that Sorum's a bad drummer at all. I'm not saying that, but I love Steven Adler's sound.
Yeah. To me, what I like about Matt Sorum,
or is it the production of Mike Klink? Because I didn't even know Adler's on. He's on Civil War. He's on one track, right? I think he's on Civil War.
So. Yeah, that's a complicated.
And to be honest with you, I wouldn't have known. So maybe it's the production. I don't know, but there's something about Adler's drums on Appetite that I love.
It's funny. Matt Sorum to me sounds like he drums like Slash plays the guitar. There's this hard edge to what he does. There's a clatteriness almost towards a Vinnie Paul kind of hard surface feel to what he does in here. And that's something that's in collaboration with Mike Klink. But I love that there's this hardness to the production. There's this hardness to the drumming, and there's this hardness to Slash's tone. And obviously there's an acidic hard quality to Axl's singing as well. So yeah, they're a violent, aggressive sounding band.
In his defense, he had to actually explain the drum fills. People were actually criticizing Sorum. Oh, it's the same damn drum fill. Bump, 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 bump. He explained that was Axl's idea. It was to connect the sound, the overall sound of these two albums. So he would tell him to do that same signature fill.
And that's very cool. I mean, that's again, Axl seeing the big picture, a little bit like Malcolm and Angus having some, influence over the drumming of Phil Rudd, right?
Right.
Kind of the same sort of thing. So yeah, that's pretty cool. And yeah, I think you end up with a creative bunch of songs which widen the palette a little bit. They're both quieter and louder than Appetite, which you would expect given 30 songs and many of them long. So you get Axl more coming into his own as the balladeer a little bit as well. They're punkier, they're bluesier. There's some that are straight down the middle that could have been on those albums. I've always liked You Could Be Mine a lot. I always thought that was a really cool song. I think they do a great job, and they silence the critics, and they do amazing. They're huge selling records.
Hey guys, thanks so much for checking out the Booked on Rock YouTube channel. If you've just discovered the channel, thanks for joining us. If you've been watching all along, can't thank you enough for your support. Make sure you tell a friend, a family member, share on social media, and also don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you get updates on latest episodes, video highlights, and more. Now back to the show. I feel bad skipping over Lies. That's a great album. That's like, oh, by the way, here's Lies that has Patience on it. It's a studio album, but there's songs that they had recorded or wrote prior to Appetite.
Yeah, it's a very complicated situation. You've got the EP, the faux indie EP. So you've got the faux live material, you've got the acoustic material, and then you put it all together. It's got this complicated title. That the original has a complicated title, the follow-up has a complicated title, and the actual, the GNR Lies is like, okay, well, is it long enough to be? So it makes you cranky even talking about it, because you don't know whether to consider an LP or an EP. It's got this fragmented two-sided thing. And then they get even more annoying, and they put out a covers album where the title of that is a nonsensical title. The Spaghetti Incident has to do with, where Steven would stash his drugs in the spaghetti takeaway tin in the styrofoam in the fridge. But not only that, it's an annoying title. And then it's got a question mark on the end, which is annoying. And then they put it in quote marks, which is annoying, like King Diamond them, right?
Yeah.
But what I do like about that album is it's really thoughtful song choices, and it's deep track song choices. And yeah, again, you get that great, Use Your Illusion production qualities to it. It all hangs together really good. It's like a really capable, ambitious, really purposeful covers album.
That was the last time we would hear of Guns N' Roses. They seemed to be impervious to the oncoming grunge era, but we know what happened. Band just fell apart. They fall apart around 94. 15 years later, we get Chinese Democracy.
Yeah, I mean, and none of this is really, the true original members we care about. But yeah, so we finally eventually get this. It's another super long album. I really don't like that people put it down because, again, it's Axl being incredibly artistic and creative and being meticulous, ambitious, trying super hard. It's a recording masterpiece. I mean, some people say it's bloated, it's too over recorded. But again, it's great that it just doesn't sound like plain old Guns N' Roses. So I think it's a great addition to the catalog. Again, going back to that episode of The Contrarians I did where it's the top 10 answers to how many Guns N' Roses albums there are. This is another one that you kind of leave out. People leave out the live album. Do you leave out Greatest Hits? Do you leave out the covers album? Do you leave out GNR Lies? Is Use Your Illusion one album? The real negative Guns N' Roses non-fans will say they only had one album, the debut, everything else is crap. But yeah, Chinese Democracy is one that people wonder how legitimate is it. One could argue that Slash albums or Velvet Revolver albums are as Guns N' Roses-y as, you can include them as much as you can include Chinese Democracy. But I think it's a good album and it's great. And it's just another part of the outlaw, strange story of this band. And then even going beyond that, they even break more rules by just having these little dribs and drabs of single songs come out, Hard School and whatnot, right? The General or whatever it's called, right? Will we ever see another Guns N' Roses album? Who knows? But you look at this catalog and it's nuts. And I go back to that episode I did about how many albums are there. This is a band that possibly is realizing that the idea of the album is an outdated concept, and they could end up doing what we see hip hoppers do all the time and just put out songs here and there and don't worry about albums too much, right? So yeah, I'll add all that up and Sympathy for the Devil and a few other things here and there and take some rarities and maybe you have another Guns N' Roses album. Not quite yet. They haven't done enough of that yet where you have that much. But yeah, it would be amazing to see another Guns N' Roses album. And I truly actually do hope that, well, I'm of two minds. I could see these dribs and drabs being on it, or it would almost be more in Axl's nature, being such a creative that he is say, let's just do another bank of new songs, nothing old, and it being really long again. You figure that when it happens, it will be a long album. I hope it does happen, and I hope it is a long album.
Same here. If that original lineup remained, or even the lineup with Matt Sorum in place of Steven Adler, how different would GNR history be? We are talking about them right now. I think it's because primarily they came back. Because if they did not, I don't know. Maybe we wouldn't be celebrating 40 years because it would have been a band that was over and done with in 2008, even before that, if you want to look at the way things play out. In mid-90s, they were done. How would things have been, how would they be looked at? I mean, they would be looked at as like the Stones, or Ozzy Osbourne made a comment about that. If they stayed together, they'd be like the Stones of hard rock.
Yeah. Well, and come to think of it, it's an interesting way of thinking about it because I think Duff is a traditional no bones rock and roller. I mean, he's got his punk rock, but he just loves hard rock and punk rock, classic rock. Slash is pretty traditional. So I think if those guys were in there along the way, maybe the lure of money and fame and all that stuff and the asking for records, we'd get a bunch more records, but they'd probably be a little more conservative. I don't think you'd see a Chinese Democracy with those guys because it takes an Axl to make a Chinese Democracy. So yeah, maybe the next album, just by virtue of it being three strong songwriters, is going to be more conservative than Chinese Democracy.
2016 is a major year in GNR history. 2 of the 40 moments in this book take place that year. First, the GNR reunion tour with Slash and Duff back on board, but also Axl stepping in for Brian Johnson and AC/DC. We touched upon this earlier, just want to get into a little bit more. You write, quote, if there were any vestiges left of Axl Rose's reputation needing continued rehabilitation, his run of 23 dates fronting AC/DC took care of the final strokes. What was more surprising, the reunion actually happening or Axl fronting AC/DC?
The reunion, I don't think, is that surprising. And like I say, what I've learned throughout the process of doing this book is how those guys kind of kept in touch, and they could fight, they could have legal battles, but they could get back together. And I think the music draws them together. So, and you've had guests showing up and stuff like that. So the reunion is not that surprising to me, but the fronting AC/DC was crazy surprising. I didn't think AC/DC would do anything like that. I would think if you're going to lose Brian, you would probably try to lose him permanently for a proper replacement. And I think Axl is just a weird choice. I never think of AC/DC as a California band, and they're obviously not American even. And it's strange to have such a distracting presence as someone who's actually even more famous than any member of AC/DC ever was fronting the band. It's such a shining, blinding light presence in that role. You hear about the business. It's like, well, you can't cancel these shows and people are going to find this interesting. The most important thing we need to do, forget about any artistic concerns. The most important thing we need to do is these shows got to go off. They have to happen, right? So it was a bizarre chapter in rock and roll history to have that happen. What I loved about it, and what I said there in that little sentence there, is it is really cool that people loved Axl in the role, and they were all surprised how good he did. I don't think people expected him to do that well. He was professional. His voice sounded great. He knew the songs. He sang them properly. And I think, like I said there, I think his reputation was even more greatly repaired by doing that job.
Not only did he do a great job, I think, of singing those songs, but there was the interview that he did where he just talked about he had the ultimate respect for Angus and the band, and then seeing him on stage where he intentionally stood back. He set his ego aside. He wasn't going to be the show. He was just going to sing. Angus was going to do his thing. He was standing back almost like you see the bassist of Malcolm and Cliff Williams. Axl almost did that too, which I thought it really did rehabilitate his reputation. It just made him look like a cool guy. Where do you rank Guns N' Roses among the greatest bands of all time? This kind of goes back to what if they remained together all those years in the 90s, between mid-90s and 2016, but would you rank them top 10, top 5, top 20?
Not very high at all. I mean, most of my favorite bands would have started in the 70s and had lots and lots and lots of records. So my favorite bands, I mean, I don't even think about Guns N' Roses until I'm down around, I don't know, 15, 20 kind of thing. I like a lot of bands way, way more than Guns N' Roses. But yeah, they are definitely one of the great bands. I mean, like I say, even I fall prey to they don't have a lot of records sometimes, but really I'd say they have in the region of 6 or 7 albums out, which is pretty decent to my mind. It almost puts them in, I've just knocked off a Contrarians show where I conceded that Max Webster is not my favorite Canadian band of all time, and they belong further down the list. But I often would say that because there are these certain bands that have like 5, 6 albums out that I think are amazing across everything they ever did, but the catalogs are short, and that would be like Max Webster, Gillan, Soundgarden, The Police, right? They all have about the same length catalogs. And Guns N' Roses kind of fits in that as well. So there's a ceiling for me on great bands of all time is like, you got to have 20 albums out. That's generally, most of the bands that I would put above Guns N' Roses have 15 albums out at least, kind of thing. And most of them start in the 70s because I'm old. So so that happened. So no, I'm definitely not going to put them in my I don't think they'd make my top 15 even.
Guns N' Roses at 40. It's out now. Find it wherever books are sold. Look for it at your nearest bookstore. You could find your nearest independent bookstore by going to bookedonrock.com. And where can people find you, Martin? Talk about your podcast, whatever else you got going on.
Yeah, so I've got the audio podcast, History in 5 Songs with Martin Popoff. I have one I do with John Gaffney, which is audio as well, Kicked in the Teeth, and AC/DC podcast. We've got our YouTube channel, The Contrarians. MartinPopoff.com is where you can get all my books. I've done about 130 books. About 100 of them are in print, and there are PayPal buttons there and all that. I sign them, send them out from the office here in Toronto. And yeah, this is the latest. And the big Iron Maiden one, Hallowed by Their Name, the official Iron Maiden Bible, came out just last month as well. And more coming down the pipes.
Awesome. Martin, thanks as always for being on. We'll talk to you again down the road.
All right. Thank you, Eric.